Hello. There are advantages and disadvantages in being the tail ender. And the big disadvantage is you're all tired, you've all spent all your money on all the other speakers' books, and you all want to get home. But the big advantage is that being the tail ender, I can do a little twist on the tail. So I'm not going to talk about what the ancient people were up to.
Sorry, Hamish, 1 moment. I'll just adjust this microphone and bring it down. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about what they're up to right now. And it's quite obvious from a lot of the speakers during the weekend that we're all aware that they are up to something. And we've been led to believe through a very strange sequence of events that what we humans are doing to each other and the whole planet has triggered very powerful responses in indigenous people all across the world that have literally transcended time. They've reopened a way of communicating which in their time was actually an accepted natural part of their existence. And this talent, which we have practically lost, was the ability to connect with each other directly from mind to mind. It just can't be dismissed as hearsay or legend, because there are so many practical examples of it happening that it just can't be ignored. Now, when we bright Brits first landed in Australia, we reported back that the indigenous people there were not civilized because they talked to trees. And we had no concept of the fact that they were so sophisticated they used the energy from the trees to focus their mental communication with people miles away. They were the people who could actually walk out in the desert and they could see energy lines like we can see roads through the countryside. They were extremely sophisticated. And this has been the theme of most of the speakers coming through, the sophistication of the old people. In New Zealand, we met two different families who could speak to each other directly through their minds. One was a mother and daughter, and they had developed such a close bond that they could live normally and happily and contentedly exchanging thoughts. And it was only when they had to do very complicated sort of things like how many tomatoes do we want and stuff like that, they would have to resort to speaking. The other one was a Maori girl who'll come into the conversation later on. And she was the fourth daughter of a Maori father and a Maori mother, and she was born with blonde hair. And for a time she was okay, but then they started ostracizing her, and the only communication she had was with her father directly, mentally. And it went on for a long time, and she learned from him because she was, and they claimed, to be descended from the ancient Waitaha. I must tell you about them. You probably all know about the ancient Waitaha. But they were a mixed race of people who lived in New Zealand for more than 1,000 years in peace and in harmony with each other and the land before the Maori arrived. Now, this is not accepted academic stuff in New Zealand. It is a political hot potato. And that's why we met Barry Brailsford over there, and he has the knowledge of the Waitaha. He was given the knowledge because the history of the Waitaha were incredible people, and they were from Tibet, they were from Africa, they were blue-eyed, red-haired ones from Northern Europe who gathered together at Easter Island, and they went out in search of the land of the Great White Cloud. And the navigators went across They spent generations trying to find this place and finally did. And they lived there. They had enormous great double-hulled whackers. And they sailed across under very difficult conditions, and they set up lots of different iwis, like clans in Scotland. And they settled the land, and they lived extremely well, because it was a wonderful new place to be. And then, 700 years ago, a very aggressive crowd of Maori arrived on the island, and they all went down to the sea shore to welcome them coming in. And the Maori, for some reason, I don't know what had upset them, but they murdered most of the men. Some of them escaped, went down to the South Island, and the traces of the Waitaha are still down there. All the women were kept. And the women vowed at that time to keep their culture and their beliefs and their legends in song. And the discipline of the Waitaha was that they taught their children a degree of concentration that we have absolutely no perception of. I mean, an example was a 20-year, actually they looked after the families enormously well, and they just looked for the children who had a potential for growing things or knowing about the sea or the stars or the getting food from the sea, agriculture, forestry, all the natural things in the world. And they collected them together and they taught them on a higher and higher level of understanding about the secrets of the universe. And at the final stage they would reach, and I'll probably show you one of the places that they called their university. This was Castle Hill in South Island. And the sort of level they taught was, finally after 10 years, there would be a one-to-one at the Honga to specialize them in their particular subject. And one of the girls, which is recorded in one of the songs, was 20-something years old, and her final degree, if you like, was to sit on top of a 200-foot cliff and tune into a shell on the beach and still hear it after the tide had come over it. Now, we can't understand that sort of degree of concentration. It is actually what's necessary to move stones. And this is what they taught. But they were pretty well destroyed. But we had the opportunity of visiting a number of places and a number of and we learned from Barry Brailsford a great deal. He's in a very difficult situation. He's an archaeologist. He's been ostracized from archaeology because he talks about the Waitaha. He knows about the Waitaha. He was asked to write by one of the elders, and he said, well, I'm not a Maori. I can't write this stuff. And he said, you can write it. You must write it, because, and again, there's coincidence here because the legend was from the women in the song that they would allow this information to come out about their culture when two particular stars had come over the horizon, the horizon. And it was interesting, that talk this morning was about the Southern Cross coming up over the northern horizon. So there's no reason to disbelieve this legend from the Waitaha that it was at that particular time. It was in 1992, I think it was. And that wasn't the Southern Cross thing, it was another one. Anyway, Barry Brailsford had to write this history, and he finally agreed, and he said, can you give me all the records? And they said, no, we can sing you the songs. And the women had remembered with perfect memory these 3,000 songs, and he had to interpret and have them interpreted. But they were so accurate that they knew the names of the 180, I think it was, people who came over in the first great double-hulled waka with the great navigator Arahai Pautu. Now these were the ancients. These were the people with tremendous knowledge, tremendous sophistication, with no perception of war. They had no weapons after 1,000 years. That's why they just, and in fact, they didn't try to protect themselves. They just stood and they were clubbed. It's a dreadful history, but it's absolutely true. And of course, it's completely denied. The academic acceptance out there is that the Maori arrived there 700 years ago, and that these were the first people in New Zealand. Now, they had a rough time after that when we went in, and we went in, there's lots of others, Europeans went in. So they are just getting back to a sort of level playing field now. There are some very, very erudite Maori in government circles, and they can express themselves well. The pendulum has swung the other way. The Maori have it more or less their own way at the moment, because if they find, I mean, David was talking about the Kaimana Wall yesterday, and we saw the Kaimana Wall, and they don't do anything with it, because the Maori, as soon as they hear that archaeological finds have been made, they declare the thing tapu. So we can't go on, us pakihas can't go in and do anything to it. So it's very, very difficult for Barry and Gary Cook to publish any of this stuff. But I will tell you that Gary Cook recently dug down with a Maori, in fact, in the front of the Kaimana Wall, and 2 or 3 spade down. They didn't actually take anything out, because they don't do that. But he photographed the stone about 3 feet down. It's got a little ledge on it, which couldn't possibly be natural. So for what it's worth, that Kaimana Wall is of the same nature as the other sites that we've been talking about. But I really want to concentrate on what we learned from the Waitaha, the old people. And we'd already been involved with a number of sacred sites, and I make no apologies for calling them to Tom, for calling them sacred sites, because to me the whole earth is sacred, but some places are more sacred than others. And I think that Glastonbury Tor is more sacred than Bermondsey High Street. Tom. So it's about semantics, and we're not really arguing about semantics in a thing like this. There are places which are recognized as being extremely sacred. Now, this girl communicated with her father with that words, and she learned from him all the secrets, not all the secrets, but some of the secrets of the whispering energies of the earth, and she comes into the story a bit later on. We'd been involved in a number of these sites in North and South Islands, and we had discovered that very early on, that the earth energy and the complex energy structures and manifestations that are happening. Now, these manifestations, people are challenging me about these manifestations, and I don't care, because like Tom says, I'm doing it completely honestly. And these are the things that I'm personally picking up. I'm not necessarily saying they are there or they're right. It's having that particular effect on me. And I'm reinforced a little bit, I think, by Tim Lyons, engineer and physicist and dowser, who introduced me to the Bernoulli brothers, who were mathematicians in the 18th century. Now, they were fascinated by spirals and Fibonacci spirals. And they did the mathematics of what would happen to a spiral of any kind, and a spiral energy, if you like, if it was impinged on by another magnetic force. And they predicted mathematically that you would get things like a lambda skate, an infinity symbol. You'd get petals from flowers. You'd get all sorts of strange manifestations. And that was 200 years ago. So I felt happy about what they had proved mathematically. And this is what's been happening to us for the last 10 years. We've been experimenting with Earth energy centers. We've been working with them, we've been dowsing them, we've been recording their manifestations. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the Earth's energy field is alive and pulsing, and it is responding to acknowledgement and recognition by human consciousness. And if you work we can do demonstration after demonstration here. We don't need to, because I don't need to prove it to you lot. At least I hope I don't. Now, we wanted to go to New Zealand. Well, actually, we looked at, in various parts of the world, because the energy manifestations that we had done with the Son of the Serpent and the Dance of the Dragon, the Son of the Serpent it was 4 years to change from a manifestation at the crossing points, at the powerful node points, from a distorted pentagram to a beautifully symmetrical 4-way 12-pointed star 3 years later. Dance of the Dragon took us 10 years, and during that time it changed from a very simple clover leaf to not a very complicated representation of the a Rosicrucian symbol, and that took over 10 years. Then we started, experimenting with an energy center in the cottage and putting artifacts, ancient artifacts on, and then asking the Earth if it would respond to the energy of the artifact. And it was quite astonishing. All these energy centers have a little vortex and radials coming out. And they would shift that and come back with a mathematical something, concentric circles, all sorts of strange petals, limbless gates, all sorts of things. And then I realized that I was putting organic things on the thing, and I got one of Mike Glickman's mathematical drawings of one of the crop circles. And believe it or not, when I put it on the energy spot and asked how it responded to that energy, I got a thing like a bunch of bananas. And I'm not the only one. There's Don Pridmore in Australia. There's Greg Wood in New Zealand. There's Freddie Silver, who wrote the seminal book on crop circles, who went to New Zealand and found many of the places that I had doubted and found exactly the same thing that he had never seen. I hadn't published the work, and he hadn't seen it, and he was coming back with the same things. So I feel good about that. There's many, many, many doubters doing it. So I'm just asking you to accept that there is an anomaly around most of the big energy centers, around the big megaliths, and it's worth investigation. That's all I'm saying. Some of them are very complex. Now, they became very complex, and some of them are just as complex as crop circles, and just as beautiful, some of them. I would like to show you some slides now of some of the active places that we went to. This one's been up. It's up there because I think, personally, it's the most beautiful photograph I've ever taken. Because we had to get up at something like 3 o'clock in the morning and drive 26 miles along the sand and get the tide right, because if you don't get the tide right, there's no way out of it, and the tide just takes your vehicle out. And we did this 26 surreal kilometers until we reached this place called Monganui Bluff. I'm afraid to press this in case it changed. Up on the top there. And we eventually went through a riverbed and up and got up to the back of it. Now, we chose that place to go to. It's halfway up the North Island on the left-hand side. And the Maori name is translated into the gathering place of all the great stars. Now, who can resist a name like that? And we finally got up to the top, and we dozed for quite some time. We found that there were 3 fairly major energy lines coming in and meeting at the top. And we thought, well, this is going to be super. It's going to be a manifestation like nobody's business here. And, oh, don't do that. We got this thing, which is Bar's Head. We have come 13,000 miles to find an old dog bone. But the thing is about this work that you have to be honest, you have to be absolutely clear about what you're looking for. You must define it, you must measure it and put it down and not make any assumptions it's going to be different. These are the rules that we have. We doze honestly, and if you don't do that, the whole thing is pointless. So that's the first result we got. But the following year, and I'm going to praise you this, because there were 5 years of visits at different times to these sites. And the second year we went there, just that centre bit had formed itself. It was absolutely perfectly symmetrical, apart from one of these, which is slightly bigger. Not this bit at the end here. That came in the third year. Perfect little place. Now, it's extremely difficult to dowse and measure a place when you have a bunch of very hard Maori who just arrive on this land and say, what are you doing here? This is our land. And Bar was great, because I was sort of measuring it, she was measuring it, and I was measuring it rather, and she was noting this stuff down in the book. And she was talking to this guy who was leaning over there, whistling through his teeth and being very menacing. And Gary Cook was up at the top just explaining what we were doing. And she was saying, 27, and is this your land? And where is your house? And all that sort of chat going on. And we finally finished the whole thing, and we discovered later on, of course, that and this is what's happening. The sacred places, the pars, are being given back to the Maori, and that's fine. And the reasonably behaved Maori are great about it. But people are coming in who, we discovered that the guy wasn't a Maori at all. He had no qualification to get anywhere near this place. And I think he was actually growing marijuana just down the hill. But he wasn't very pleasant. So we had quite a rough time on that. But nevertheless, that is the degree of change in the manifestation in this sacred place within 2 years. Now, up at the north of the whole thing that got us into this work with Barry Brailsford was that we started doing this work. And I went up to Cape Rainga, which is about half a mile on the left of this thing. Cape Rainga is the absolute northern top of the North Island. And we started dowsing there. There's a wonderful thing called a tuatara, which is it's the only remaining live dinosaur. They only live in New Zealand in one particular island. But the ancients have carved rocks to represent the tuatara, because the tuatara was always the guardian. It was the one who looked after the sacredness of place. And I dowsed the energy going out there. And for the first time, the only time we've ever found it in the world, the energy was about 25, 28 feet wide, roughly. But all the bands of energy within that were all traveling in the same direction. Now, I've never found that anywhere before, because energy travels both ways within an energy line, sometimes, and sometimes changes in the morning and evening and all that. I won't go into the technicalities of it, but that is the only place. So I rang Barry Brailsford, and I said, is there anything special about Cape Rainga, because it is the most special place in the world from an energy point of view? And he immediately sat up and took notice about what we were doing and took our whole project very seriously, because he said there is a legend in New Zealand that all the Maori souls, or all the people's souls who die in New Zealand, travel up these lines and eventually go out through, over the top of Cape Rainga, into the next phase. They go to their ultimate destination, if you like. Half a mile away, there's another line coming in which goes both ways, and that little head, did I say little head? That thing, that's Bar there, that little creature. It's a huge stone. And it was centred on this line, which was pulsing either way. And Bar had to go there because I'd had, I'll tell you about that later, I'd had a thing, my leg wasn't very good. She'd had to cross a river and over barbed wire and climb the hill and do the dowsing over there. And I had a Dr. Cornelius van Dorp. Why do I have to say doctor? It's because it implies reliability. And I had Corny with me. If I said Corny, you would have wondered who he was. And I was stumbling about this leg, and I can actually dowse, if I can see the place, I can dowse the manifest of energy around it. And I was drawing it out in the sand, very slowly, And Corn was doing the measuring, and we drew it out on a little book, and he said, that looks awfully like something I've got on my computer. I've got a collection of crop circles. So we went back to his house after we'd done the whole measuring and stuff like that. And no. I've blown it again. I used to have I've got a projector like the size of a tank. And it's so heavy, I couldn't bring it. And I put it on the top of its pedestal, and I put a slide in it. It goes, ba-chunk, and it puts the slide on the thing, and I like it that way. No, I want that one. I want the one before. That's it. Stay there.
Point it this way. Press it towards the projector.
Bear with me, I'm a dinosaur. 1, 2, 3. Now that was what we got from that amazing stone. And you'll see it's extraordinary, really. It was very, very precise, except for that one big one there. And that was the photograph that we found on Corney's collection. It was taken by Lucy Pringle in Avebury in 2002. There is a fantastic similarity between these two. Not the same number of propeller blades, but it's very similar. So there begins to be some sort of correlation about the crop circle phenomena and the phenomena of Earth energy, which we can't ignore. One Tree Hill, oops. Be patient, will you? Yeah. No. There you are, One Tree Hill. One Tree Hill was the second site I'll have to move on a bit. The second site we went to, it's called One Tree Hill because there was one tree over there, and it was a Scots pine tree, and one night one of the Maori reckoned that they shouldn't have a non-indigenous tree, so he knocked the Scots pine tree down. This was 17 years ago, and they tried to grow a New Zealand tree, and in the conditions they can't get one of their own to grow. So it's been planted and replanted. It's now No Tree Hill, but it's a volcano, extinct volcano in Auckland, and that one is it's out of sequence a little bit, but don't let's worry about it. But can you see these bits on the end there? And remember the old dog bone we found a year ago. Now that was the Earth Energy manifestation in 2003. When we went back the next year, it was that. And that was equally difficult to dowse because there were 30 Maori children all around there being taught the history of New Zealand. And they're all creeping around there, fascinated by this huge, great dowsing rod, saying, "Why are you drawing the sun in the dust, mister?" And I was trying to explain to them why I was drawing the sun in the dust. I didn't quite know why I was doing that. But that was the fundamental change that had happened in the air. And then that one was the following year. Very, very precise, jagged, but very precise indeed. Now we went down to South Island, and we found, this is not recorded, there is nothing about this stone at all. And Greg Wood, an apple farmer that we were staying with, the lovely thing about New Zealand is you're passed on from one to the other. We stayed with Barry for a bit, so we must go out and see Greg. Greg's an apple farmer, and he said, I've seen this thing from the road for 28 years, and I really want to get up there, but there's no right of way in can you hear me all right when I stand back there? There's no right of way in New Zealand, And you have to get the farmer's permission. They always give it if you ask, provided you haven't got a dog, because they've always got sheep, and if they put a dog amongst the sheep, they shoot it. It's as simple as that. So we had to get permission to go up there, four-wheel drive, all that sort of thing. Arrived up at the top of this thing and found that stone. Now, it's a standing, there's no question, it's a standing stone. We had a lot of sensitive people with us, and we came to the conclusion that it had been probably put there something like 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. Because it's an artificially standing on a mound, built up the stones all around it, and you could almost see the energy coming up the top. And nobody has talked about it. The manifestation, you won't believe that manifestation, but I did. It took me 3 hours to douse it. And I didn't draw it out until I got back home. I didn't realize just how complex it was. But it was, I have doused previously a very similar manifestation from the Punamu top of a talking stick that a Zulu spiritual leader who came down to Cornwall with a group of people allowed me to douse in Cornwall. And I got a very similar thing to that shape. It's always associated with New Zealand or Punamu stone. And the following year, it changed itself into that. And that's the most beautiful manifestation I have ever doused on an energy field around a stone. And it was around that incredible stone. We called it the Greg and Rose stone because they showed us it, but it's now the Brooklyn Tor. And Greg and Rose actually are now working on this stuff. They learned to douse, they learned about what we were doing, they're so keen about it that they're dowsing all through the South Island of New Zealand now, and constantly going up to this place and checking it. And when they were with us, Rose didn't really understand. We had just bought a present of a camera because we were staying there free, and she was snapping away. And this is two photographs she took of Greg. She took that one first, and you can see where the sun is. I mean, it has moved just a fraction. And she said, "Greg, you were mucking about. Stand there again. I want to take another photograph." And she altered the whatever it was on the digital camera a bit, and she took that second one. And when it came out, she was going to throw it away. I said, "No, we must look at it." And I don't know whether you can see it, but you can see the spiral of black energy. It's not black energy, it's spiral of energy. That's how it comes in. We've got dozens of these. And actually, Jim Lyons, again, has got one that either he took of his wife by a standing stone or his wife took of him. But it seems to have an effect when there's a close liaison, if you like, between the people who are either taking the film or being in the film. I have tried 1,000 times to take that sort of shot, and I can't do it. I've got one or two vague effects, but nothing very much at all. That is the most extraordinary representation of earth energy coming up, the vortex of earth energy coming up through a stone I've ever seen. Now we went south to South Island, Castle Hill. Don't want you to see that. Next one. That's it. This is Castle Hill. This is the place I was talking about. This is where the Waitaha had their ultimate university, their training ground. And there was these stones, they are limestone. They were originally from the bottom of the ocean. They were pushed up by a massive great earthquake, I don't know how long ago, when the island was formed. 450 million years ago, or something like that. But these stones are made of trillions of little living beings. And they still have an incredible feeling of a life force in them. Now that was it turned out to be the complete strongest energy center in the whole place, and there's miles of it. There's miles of stones around there. And I cannot think that the the ancients, when they were doing this, and I'm talking about the 8,000 years ago, didn't enhance that stone in some way. It is huge. If you stood there, your head comes up here. It's just absolutely monumental. And we call it the Great Headstone. It's obvious why. I'm quite sure that's been dressed a little bit, as the ancient people did. That's Maratini. She's the lady. She's 180 feet to 200 feet high. A pure piece of sandstone. She rules the roost of the whole marae. And that's the final place where they got their final degrees, if you like, when they were at this Waitaha University. That's Rahau Putu, the navigator, the wind eater. Ra is the sun, Hau is food, Putu, I think, is the eating. I'm not quite sure, but it's close. And I was dozing around that one, and it is absolutely magnificent. And the legend is, of course, this is the original navigator who came with the first waka, who came up here to die, and he's waiting there for the next big waka to come in with another 180 people, a couple of thousand years ago. Now this was that's the sort of thing that one sees up there. It's such a numinous place. It's so incredibly active and energized and beautiful and sacred. And that was on the morning that we came up with the final day. But I have a little story to tell before that because our final visit to the island, to New Zealand, was interrupted for nearly 4 weeks because we wanted to go to Australia first, and either we started off in Singapore, and either I was bitten by, or either I drank the Singapore water, or I was bitten by something in New Zealand or in Australia. But my leg suddenly blew up to twice its size. It was just huge, with a pound of sausages in the bottom, and I just couldn't stand. And I got convulsive hiccups, and I completely lost my voice. I had a whole tour of talks arranged with Barry and Gary. So Bar had to phone up and cancel it. We had hoped to be 3 days with these people in New Zealand, and it eventually ended up with 3 weeks, because I was put into intensive care. And I was on drip fed for 5 days, and I lost about 12 pounds in weight. And in fact, I was so far gone that Bar and I had a very earnest discussion about how to get me back home if I actually didn't make it. And we decided that a quick cremation would be great, because she could pour me into a plastic container, screw the lid on, put it on the luggage rack, and perhaps claim a rebate on my seat. Because it costs you, if you're croaked, it costs you 12,000 quid to get back here. Anyway, it wasn't necessary. But during that time, I was hallucinating. I had nothing to eat, and I don't want to make a drama of the story. But the hospital, 4 consecutive nights, the hospital changed, and I had an identical hallucination, which was really cathartic. And the hospital changed into a 3-story laboratory with great big glass tanks with coloured liquids bubbling in them. And a very benign white-coated attendants or assistants came along, and they were putting nutrients into the tanks. And in the tanks were sort of amoebas, and I was one of them. I was an amoeba. And I was so grateful for these people just putting in the nutrients, and I was very comfortable. And there was a very sophisticated cherry picker who used to come along and pick up the tanks and put them in a different position. You get different nutrients coming in. And I wasn't afraid, because behind me I was aware of 2 of the most immense beings who were obviously livid about having to look after me. Because they had great deep voices. I didn't see them. Great deep voices. And they were grumbling to each other, saying, "Very well having to look after this creature, but he's made of very poor material." And I was reassured that they were actually there to make sure I was okay. So I wasn't particularly worried. I knew I was going to come out of it. But I really got to know them so well, because that happened for 4 nights, that I did a sketch of, before I came out of the hospital, I did a sketch of what I thought they might look like, just for fun, really. And then finally, when the leg bit disappeared, after some recuperation, we finally got up to Castle Hill. Now, 2 years previously at Castle Hill, we had met with, I dosed it, and the marae in the centre was absolutely magnificent. There were 5 powerful energy lines coming in and meeting at the centre. And I thought, and you shouldn't do this, I assumed that there was going to be some sort of really good business-like manifestation at the end of it. I could not find anything, nothing. And I dowsed deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. As you know, you can do that. You can douse at different levels. You do a superficial one and then you go deeper and deeper and deeper until you're absolutely, completely tuned in on what you're looking for. I found nothing, absolutely nothing at all. And the following day, we were up there again, and more or less in despair, and I'd gone to have a look for a well, and Bar got involved because this Maori girl, Donna, was with a group of people who were just looking at these sites. And apparently she took on, she had a big knapsack on, and she was very hunched and was not quite with the party, and big gap tooth missing in the front. And she took the pack off and pulled out a great punamu. Now, punamu is the peace stone. It's the hardest stone in the world. It's a form of emerald. And it's made by colossal pressure. Jade, sorry. It's a form of jade. I'm getting senile, old and senile. You do correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, she pulled this great big stone out. And the day before, I had doused the floor of this marae, which is normally covered in water. It was dust, and there was hundreds of stones. And I had doused the centre, and I had placed a stone that I would recognise at the energy centre. And Donna actually took this thing off. She picked up this huge, great, very heavy punamu stone, and went very delicately into that, being very careful about where her feet went. And she came to the place where my stone was, because Bar knew where it was. And she kicked it out of the way, and she put the stone on the top of it. And when I heard that story, I mean, I was so overjoyed that she had recognized the energy center of this place, and it was right where I'd put the little stone. And she called in Bar and a German girl and a New Zealander, 2 Australians, I think, women. And she said, and she suddenly became a complete metamorphosis, almost balletic. You know, the hair went down, and she took her she had a rug thing that she wore. Took it off, and she was quite balletic, and she started singing to the earth. And Bar said it was something that it was just deeply moving. And just before she started to sing, out of the rocks appeared a Maori man with a great long stick, and he came up to her, and she didn't know who he was, but they just hung and recognized each other, and he disappeared, completely disappeared. They don't know where he went. And they had this ceremony, and then he sang, and she got the 4 women and sang with them. And Bar told me about the ceremony. I was hugely impressed. I wished I had been there, but then I would have been de trop, because it was a women's ceremony, actually. So the next day I went up there, and I doused, because the day before there was nothing there. And I doused to see if it had made any difference. And that had appeared in the centre of the marae. Now this thing is about 20 feet diameter, and it took me, I think it was over 2 hours to do it. And I started at this point here, and just drew in the sand what I was finding. You just follow the dowsing rod around. And 2.5 hours later, I arrived back, precisely at that point there. Now, I defy anybody to do that if there's nothing there. It's a 9-petaled thing, and it's absolutely symmetrical. And you just cannot do it unless you're following something that's actually there. You don't get back to the same place. And it's not regular. Now, the very few days after that, that little dog bone thing that you saw by mistake in One Tree Hill formed almost within a few days of this one. So there was some sort of communication there, but we couldn't find, in our whole time in New Zealand, we couldn't find consistent lines going through and joining each other up. And I think there are reasons for that, but nevertheless. And the following year, we came back and no, that one. That one. And if you see, the subtlety is, of course, it's gone to 12 petals. And it's also put another little petal out. And by this time, I was at a stage this time where we hadn't found what we thought we were going to find in New Zealand. We didn't find this pair of lines. We didn't find anything that we expected to find. And I'm glad we didn't, because we'd have been creating it probably. And I didn't want any of that. And there just happened to be there a friend of ours called Pat Ango from Cornwall. She's a sensitive. And she'd come to see the site. We tied up by half a day. And she'd come up to see the site, and she was completely knocked out by it. And she was sitting down in the marae where near the energy centre, and she suddenly looked up and said, I don't do this sort of thing, Amish, but you've got to come. I've got a message for you. You've got to come and sit beside me here. And she said, somebody was trying to speak through her. And the voice came through, tell the male that his job is to record these things and not to interpret them. Because I was in a state of total frustration. I was finding these complex things, didn't know what they were for, didn't know whether it was worth doing anymore. Would I just go on and on and on, not knowing what they were all about? So this message came through. Tell the male, he's just got to measure these things up. This is not the representation of a pretty flower. This is a manifestation of opening minds. And also tell the male that there are 7 different levels of understanding in this place, and he has not even reached the 2nd level. So they're very good at the management and the old people at cutting you down to size. But they are quite right, of course, because you have to understand that they are trying to get a very, very complex message through, and you can't let anything stand in the way of it. And the final one, sorry, oh, that's blown it. That is completely blown it. No. That one. That was the manifestation on the final day when we went up there. Now, I think that was still shifting, because there was an in-between one, which was nothing to do with that. It was like a jelly with legs sticking out of it. And that energy was pulsing all the time. And that's got 11 petals, and I think it was shuffling around to get the 12th one in, because there's a 12 factor, and all of this stuff that we're doing creeps in the end. Nothing to do with me, but it creeps in. And that was the final one. And I sat down there on the last day, beautiful morning. That's where we took that dawn photograph that you've just seen. And I sat down there and I went into a deep meditation. It's at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's just absolutely beautiful. There's nothing else there. And I got deeper and deeper and deeper into meditation, and I became aware. Bar was sitting just a little bit away. And I was aware I was being watched. And you know what it's like when you something at your back and you're being watched there, and you try and ignore it. And it was affecting the depth of the meditation. So eventually I had to turn around. And I saw these two great creatures. Can you see the relative size of them? That's me. That's the two big creatures. That's the ears, that's the eyes, that's the nose, that's the eyes, that's the eyes. And I immediately recognized them because that's a sketch I made 6 weeks before in the hospital. But can we go back to the other one? And just as a comparison, back to the sketch. Anyway, you've seen what it's like. And through these are the stone people. These are the people who have the great monolith, the great megalith, the biggest megalith in the world, I think, really, that I've ever come across. But they were just huge beings, and I was aware of their life force. And of course, I was shocked because they were so familiar, and I'd sketched them before. And through them, I had a really deeply moving communication with the ancient elders. They said I had reached the head of the serpent, where in the old days, the people were taught the secrets of the universe. I have to press you what they said, because it went on for many hours, and of course you have to translate. The language is strange, because we're using this mind-to-mind communication, and I'm not used to it. But they just expressed their utter dismay at what had happened to the human race since that time. They were desperately concerned about the way we choose our leaders, and their leaders were born at the right place at the right time, under the right stars, and with a natural ability through generations of being able to make compassionate decisions that suited everybody. They didn't need 100,000 people to tell them what to say. They were deeply concerned about the way our medical people treat mind, body, and spirit as separate entities. They just don't do that. Their healers were healers, and they used natural medicines, and there was no question of commercial exchange coming into it at all. I find it very moving, actually, because this was not a complaint. This was just dismay that was coming through. Deep, deep concern. They couldn't understand the intolerable waste we have of the earth's precious resources, making useless things. They understood the whole business of corruption in financial ways. They're extremely aware of the present day corruptions and the racial tensions, the religious intolerance. And they said, surely something can be done about this. Maybe it can if you start using this mind-to-mind method of communication. They were appalled at the lack of care for each other and for the planet. And it's a précis of a long dissertation that was just deeply involving. And it was a long time, a long list, and Barney came back hurting from the vision that they'd conjured up for us. Because we blind ourselves to what's happening in the world, at least we do. We have felt we had to do something positive, and we discussed it for a long time. And I had written a book in 1998 called It's Not Too Late, where I was fulminating then about four-wheel drives and the corruption and the oil companies and the media dishonesty and all of these things. And okay, it got to 30,000 people or something like that, but that's all. So I was going to write another book called It's Damn Nearly Too Late Now, just do something. And Bar said, don't bother, you'll just get to the same people. So after long, long discussions, she said, okay, we're going to use, I'm afraid of technology, you can see. But she says, we're going to use the web. We've got to get this thing out somehow to a much wider audience. And we're having a meeting one night, and you'll see it in the video, but the thing that really triggered me was, because we have these meetings every 6 weeks to celebrate solstices and all the Celtic celebrations. We built a stone circle, and we just acknowledge the land, and we don't know who's coming out. There might be 5 people, there might be 50 people, and we just have a little ceremony, put the world right, and they relax and get into the earth again. And this November evening, it was, or whatever it was pouring rain, it was very cold. There was only 5 people turned out. We went back into the kitchen, and a chap called Gary Merrill, who is a complete peacemaker, he said, every human being has the right to live in peace, but we'll never get the peace until we claim the right. And I felt a shiver going down my spine. And I got very excited about it, and we had lots and lots of meetings, and I said, it's pointless confronting the organisations that exist now. They are much too powerful. You can't get a voice heard. And I think it was Buckminster Fuller who said something like, you can't break down existing systems, you create another system that's better, and the first one breaks down. And I thought, that's exciting. And somebody said, why don't we do that and call it parallel community? And another great shiver down the spine. So we sorted it out. We had a first meeting, just as a trial, in Penzance in October last year. And 175 people turned up. All very enthusiastic. And we said what we were going to do. Basically, we just want to be a connector to all the hundreds of thousands of groups of people who think the same way, but they don't know that the group next door is doing the same thing. We just want to be connectors. In fact, I'm delighted to say that our web is being done by the man who created Glastonbury. And he's using a photograph that one of our people, because the right people seem to be coming in now. In the first evening, a middle-aged lad, a very gentle, quiet middle-aged man came up and he said, I'm an accountant, I will deal with your books. And I thought, great. Somebody else has come in and said, we'll do something else. The accountant's wife came in 3 weeks ago when I was absolutely flat because I'm not good at computers and I was getting in a right mess with them. And she just sat down in front of the computer and said, go away. And I was so relieved. And it's all been, all our connectors lists and our supporters lists have been sorted out. And the last meeting we had was a few days ago, and the criticism we've had is that in the DVD and in the short DVD even, we're all sort of grey-haired and the men are bearded and there are no young people. And these 2 young people turned up because they'd come to one of the dowsing courses, actually. Not the wife, but the wife came along as well. And they've taken this thing over, and they said, yes, we want to spread it. And she's into films, and she wants to take this stuff into schools. And she said, oh, the only way to get this thing out, and forget the big long DVDs and things like that, people's attention span is 4 minutes. I didn't realise that. 4 minutes, and that's all, and they back off. So she's going to start doing that. She's going to start doing things with kids who are going to ask their parents the questions like, why do we need to have war? And they'll have to answer them. And basically what we're trying to put over is we've done the usual routine to government people just to see what happened. And we waited 3 months for an answer to the planning people who are planning to have new legislation, which means that local authorities will have no voice in anything that's going up in the local area at all, no official voice. And we got this 3-page letter back saying, yes, you have a voice. At the end of the time, there'll be a meeting where you can make oral complaint. Thank you very much, because the decision's already been made. So we're not going to do that. We are going to write an open letter to government proposing alternative ways of thinking, not crying about what they're doing, because there's been enough crying. And we're going to propose that it is possible to conceive of a world economy which is not run on armaments, because that's where the world is run at the moment. And if you run a world economy on armaments, you have to create wars to get the orders for the companies. And what you start with that premise, that there are other things that you can do to make money other than killing people. It seems quite simple to me. But it's a gigantic step to take. So I'd like to show you just the 4-minute, not 4 minute, 6.5 minute DVD now. It tells you about the aims, and what I can ask you to do is just to consider looking at the website, and also consider when you go out from here, don't rush off home, think bookshop. There are DVDs down there. Now, there are some very quietly spoken words by John Watts, which I think is the most powerful thing in this whole DVD. And he turns on and says, doing nothing is no longer an option. And I think it's good. I'm Hamish. I'm a blacksmith. I'm a metal sculptor. I do a bit of writing. I work with trees and I work with the land. It's just so important that people realise that they do have a direct communication through their consciousness with the planet. And they can affect profoundly the future of the planet and the communication with the planet and the care for the planet by their thought and their concern for its being. I really wanted to set up Parallel Community because of a whole series of events that happened leading towards an enormous dissatisfaction with the way the world was going on at the moment. You can't actually tilt at well-established systems, and the only way to get around them was to provide an alternative which was better. And it seems to be a huge step, but it's the only logical one that I can see that was going to work. Because if enough people get together, they have a loud enough voice to make themselves heard. We were talking about it with lots of friends, and we had this meeting down at the Seed, and a number of people, different people come up every 6 weeks, and we tune in with the earth, and we celebrate the cycles of the earth. And this particular evening, it was pouring with rain, only 5 people turned up.
So there were 5 of us at the meeting, and there are frequently 20 or more. So we sat in a small group and listened to some beautiful music.
Gary Merrill was sitting in the back there, and he suddenly looked up and he said, everybody, every human being has the right to live in peace, but we'll never get that peace until we claim the right.
I'd say the Parallel Community is a platform for people who are no longer happy with being ignored.
The idea of the Parallel Community was, in a sense, looking at what people can get together to do.
People who feel isolated, who feel that they're not getting anywhere, that they are fighting a battle on their own, not realizing that there are millions of us all in the world, and we just need to connect.
The Parallel Community is an empowerment, or a voice for empowerment.
And to show people that they're not alone, that one person working in their village or their town or their community may be doing exactly the same as another group in another village or town or community, but not knowing it.
Try and get all of these people together by means of a website, so they have a contact, they know what's happening in their local patch, they know what's happening in the next patch. And we want to encourage some sort of community way of thinking, which says, okay, how does this we can't sort the global problem out at the moment. How do we sort our local problem out? And if we have a local problem, is it the same as the community next door? If we have a solution to our particular problem, can we help that community? And it starts in a very small way with individual people.
The parallel communities emblem is almost like a bridge going over a river that we are going to just bridge over, and the rest can do what they like, but we will walk over the bridge and try and live and give an example that there is another way.
I think somehow we need to find new structures, new ways of going on, which perhaps are outside politics, they're outside religion, they're outside the institutions that we now have.
So that we can find different ways of doing it to change the energy of the present systems that we're all thinking are outmoded now.
People can come in with their ideas, and even if we don't kind of have that on our agenda, we will know where we can put that person with that idea, connect them up to somebody else, so that we form like a connector.
Already we have 40 connectors from all over the world, from Britain to Europe, Switzerland, Amsterdam, Germany, to Australia, South Africa, America. It's quite remarkable. You know, word of mouth only, really. One person tells another person, and they are inspired to join in.
I think it's helping the world, people to live together more accepting and appreciative of other people, so that we just live in a more peaceful way.
We want to become a centre of knowledge and ways of moving our community spirit forward. The essence is to get people back to doing practical things. Practical things, not necessarily in the terms of making things, but practical living with your neighbours. Once we join up and get maybe a few thousand, maybe a few 100,000, but we're looking actually for millions of people. And we're not going to march with placards and things like that. We're going to quietly say to the politicians, wonderful. 10 million people would like this to happen. Listen to us.
Instead of being told this and this is going to happen, it would give us a voice to discuss it, and maybe we might learn that we are wrong on some things, but it's the ideas of not having a voice.
I think we will become a significant voice that the government will have to take notice of. Now, whether they regard it as a pain in their derriere is something they have to decide.
They will know through our web that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people are thinking this particular way, and it must influence the decision-making process.
Every single thing we do, there's a reaction for every action. You become part of what you're around. You can't help that. And everything we do, everything all of us do, is completely interconnected, negative or positive. So it might as well be positive.
Doing nothing, I don't think is really an option anymore.
There is another way of living.
Nature around us is alive, and we can make a difference.
But there is a huge amount of humour in the universe. And the humour and the laughter and the joy is being crushed out of us because you can't control people who are laughing. It's time we just shook our heads and got out of this and said, okay, what are we going to do about it? So join Parallel Community. We have, when we made that, we had 42 connectors. We now have 85 connectors and 357 supporters. If you feel like joining us with any skill at all, or just by organising a group, or even just talking about it, pick up the leaflet and contact us. Thank you very much. that they could live normally and happily and contentedly exchanging thoughts. And it was only when they had to do very complicated sort of things like how many tomatoes do we want and stuff like that, they would have to resort to speaking. The other one was a Maori girl who'll come into the conversation later on. And she was the fourth daughter of a Maori father and a Maori mother, and she was born with blonde hair. And for a time she was okay, but then they started ostracizing her, and the only communication she had was with her father, directly, mentally. And it went on for a long time, and she learned from him because she was, and they claimed, to be descended from the ancient Waitaha. I must tell you about them. You probably all know about the ancient Waitaha. But they were a mixed race of people who lived in New Zealand for more than 1,000 years in peace and in harmony with each other and the land before the Maori arrived. Now, this is not accepted academic stuff in New Zealand. It is a political hot potato. And that's why we met Barry Brailsford over there, and he has the knowledge of the Waitaha. He was given the knowledge because the history of the Waitaha were incredible people, and they were from Tibet. They taught their children a degree of concentration that we have absolutely no perception of. I mean, an example was a 20-year. Actually, they looked after the families enormously well, and they just looked for the children who had a potential for growing things or knowing about the sea or the stars or getting food from the sea, agriculture, forestry, all the natural things in the world. And they collected them together, and they taught them at a higher and higher level of understanding about the secrets of the universe. And at the final stage they would reach, and I'll probably show you one of the places that they called their university. This was Castle Hill in South Island. And the sort of level they taught was, finally, after 10 years, there would be a one-to-one at the Honka to specialize them in their particular subject. And one of the girls, which is recorded in one of the songs, was 20-something years old, and her final degree, if you like, was to sit on top of a 200-foot cliff and tune into a shell on the beach and still hear it after the tide had come over it. Now, we can't understand that sort of degree of concentration. It is actually what's necessary to move stones. And this is what they taught. But they were pretty well destroyed. In Africa, there were blue-eyed, red-haired ones from Northern Europe who gathered together at Easter Island, and they went out in search of the land of the Great White Cloud. And the navigators went across. They spent generations trying to find this place, and finally did. And they lived there. They had enormous, great double-hulled wakas, and they sailed across under very difficult conditions, and they set up lots of different iwis, like clans in Scotland. And they settled the land, and they lived extremely well, because it was a wonderful new place to be. And then, 700 years ago, a very aggressive crowd of Maori arrived on the island, and they all went down to the sea shore to welcome them coming in. And the Maori, for some reason, I don't know what had upset them, but they murdered most of the men. Some of them escaped, went down to the South Island, and the traces of the Waitaha are still down there. All the women were kept. And the women vowed at that time to keep their culture and their beliefs and their legends in song. And the discipline of the Waitaha was that they, and this talent which we have practically lost, was the ability to connect with each other directly from mind to mind. It just can't be dismissed as hearsay or legend. because there are so many practical examples of it happening that it just can't be ignored. Now, when we bright Brits first landed in Australia, we reported back that the indigenous people there were not civilized because they talked to trees. And we had no concept of the fact that they were so sophisticated, they used the energy from the trees to focus their mental communication with people miles away. They were the people who could actually walk out in the desert and they could see energy lines like we can see roads through the countryside. They were extremely sophisticated. And this has been the theme of most of the speakers coming through, the sophistication of the old people. In New Zealand, we met two different families who could speak to each other directly through the minds. One was a mother and daughter, and they had developed such a close bond. Hello. There are advantages and disadvantages in being the tail ender. And the big disadvantage is you're all tired, you've all spent all your money on all the other speakers' books, and you all want to get home. But the big advantage is that being the tail ender, I can do a little twist on the tail. So I'm not going to talk about what the ancient people were up to.
Sorry, Image, one moment. I'll just adjust this microphone and bring it down. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about what they're up to right now. And it's quite obvious from a lot of the speakers during the weekend that we're all aware that they are up to something. And we've been led to believe through a very strange sequence of events that what we humans are doing to each other and the whole planet has triggered very powerful responses in indigenous people all across the world that have literally transcended time. They've reopened a way of communicating which in their time was actually an accepted natural part of their existence.